Hello again, everybody. Once again, Pastor Tom Vanderbilt here from Mount Calvary in Indianola, here to help you take a longer look at our appointed gospel lesson for this Sunday, which is the Sunday of the Transfiguration, or the Transfiguration of our Lord, and that's February 14th, 2020, or 2021. Now, I don't want to go back to 2020, that's for sure. 2021. So hopefully you have a copy of our handout in front of you, and what I'd like to do is just start by reading this first paragraph before we get into the text, because it helps to really set the stage for this season of the church year that we're just wrapping up this Sunday. The Epiphany season follows the celebration of the birth of Jesus and points to his life and ministry with an emphasis on his manifesting himself as the Son of God, which is what Epiphany means. So I wanted to stop there because I don't like this word manifesting. Is it accurate to the original Greek text? Absolutely. Epiphanos that's usually how you learn it in your beginning Greek classes. Epiphanos means to manifest. So, Pastor, why don't you like it then? I don't like it because of what that word manifest can mean now in our modern parlance and our modern in the way we use it. I often hear people as they are on journeys of self-realization and self-actualization, talking about how different things became manifest in their life. So that when they're on these journeys, a lot of times when people talk about things becoming manifest in their life, they're talking about how they became something, how they started as one thing and then they changed to another thing. And so when we start talking about how here Jesus manifests himself as the Son of God, it's sometimes easy for us to imply that Jesus started out as one thing and then slowly was changing himself into another. It's this concept of Jesus that lead Mormons to be a little bit different in their understanding of Jesus than we are, and also Jehovah's Witnesses as well. It's this idea that Jesus wasn't born divine, but through his works, through his deeds, through his good living, he was able to manifest himself into the divine Son of God, and he did it so well that when the Father saw that he had died wrongly, he resurrected him from the dead, and that's the promise that's given to us too. If we live rightly, we can manifest ourselves into becoming sons and daughters of God, and he'll have the same grace on us and give us the same things that he gave to Jesus. Okay, so this is why I know the Bible study uses the word manifesting. Manifesting can be the right idea. The word that I like to use instead, and it's also good in keeping with the original language, is revealing. That this is how Jesus reveals himself to be the Son of God. See, because when you reveal something, it's already true at the beginning, but you're just making it more true. I love some of the classical novels that come out of France around the time of the American Revolution and right around their time of Napoleonic struggle and everything. You know, that 18th, 19th century. Les Mis is one of my favorites, but another one I also enjoy by Alexandre Dumas is The Count of Monte Cristo. And if you've read that book or seen any one of the movies, you know, Edward Dantes is always the same guy throughout. He's always the same. He's pretending to be this Count of Monte Cristo, and slowly throughout the book and slowly throughout the movie, he reveals himself. See, he's not changing from one into the other. He's revealing that as the Count of Monte Cristo, he is actually, Edmond Dumas, or Edmond Dantes. Edmond Dantes. And how that plays out with his former betrothed and with other things that I won't spoil too much. But it's when you take something that you already are and you're revealing it more fully. See, that's what Jesus has been doing. Is when he is born in Bethlehem of Mary, he is the Christ, the Son of God, the Messiah, the one who has come to save the world. And now throughout the season of Epiphany, as we've looked at how he began his ministry, and as it culminates now here on this transfiguration, we see him revealed for who he really is, how he's been sort of hiding himself, and now on this Mount of Transfiguration, he fully reveals himself in preparation for that time when he will reveal himself even more fully through his death and resurrection. Okay, so I know there's that word manifest. You might think that I'm overthinking this a little bit. Okay, fair enough. But I still believe that words have meanings, and that those meanings that we have, we should have more words in the English language to be more precise, and not less words in the English language to be less precise. That's why I love Greek so much, is that they have an abundance of words that can be used very precisely, and so on with that. So anyway, enough about Epiphany and manifestations and revelations. Let's carry on. The Feast of the Epiphany is always January 6th, the remembrance of the coming of the Magi. Okay, Epiphany Day is always January 6th. It's one of our set festivals, like Christmas on December 25th, and so forth. The first Sunday to follow is always devoted to the baptism of our Lord, and the last Sunday of the season always celebrates the transfiguration of our Lord. So one of the things that happens here, because Epiphany is always January 6th, January 6th only falls on a Sunday one time out of 7, on average. And so what often happens is very rarely do churches celebrate Epiphany Day. I know we haven't celebrated it the 2 years I've been here at Mount Calvary, and there's been a lot of other churches where it hasn't been their tradition or their custom to celebrate the Feast of the Epiphany, and so it largely goes unobserved. You go to other cultures, however, a lot of Latin American cultures, Epiphany Day is bigger than Christmas, because a lot of those cultures will wait. They also call it Three Kings Day. And a lot of cultures will wait until that day to give the traditional gifts that we would give at Christmas. Because January 26th is when we remember when the Magi came, and when the Magi came, they brought gifts. The shepherds who came that first night when Jesus was born, they brought no gifts. They didn't bring anything. The Magi, when they came sometime later, they brought gifts. Anyway, so usually our experience with Epiphany is that we go from either the first Sunday after Christmas or the second Sunday after Christmas, and the next thing you know, we're in the first Sunday after the Epiphany, and we don't even know that the Epiphany happened. But it's okay, because that first Sunday after the Epiphany then is Jesus' baptism, when he comes up out of the water and the voice speaks from heaven, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." And that's how that season begins. And now, rightly so, when we get to our text here in the Transfiguration, we will hear another voice come from heaven that says, "This is my Son, listen to him." Okay. So what the authors of our Bible study is pointing out is quite correct, is that revelation of who Jesus is provides those bookends for the entire season, so that no matter what else may fall in between, Jesus' revelation about himself begins, and then also in this season kind of ends, even though the Transfiguration is sort of in the midpoint of Jesus' ministry. But in this season, it ends with that idea that Jesus is the Son of God, and God likes that, as we heard in the baptism of our Lord, or we should listen to him, as we'll hear today. Okay. So they serve as bookends, and provide their own distinct epiphanies of Jesus as the Son of God. All right. I think I've gotten through that. I hope I didn't skip parts. If I did, feel free to go back and read it yourself. So, nevertheless, let's continue to move on here, and let me share our text. So this is from Mark chapter 9, verse 2. I'm reading from the English Standard Version. This is the same version that we read in our worship services here at Mount Calvary. You might be reading from a different version, and so it may not sound exactly the same word for word. But I think the gist is going to be the same. So here's our text. Again, Mark chapter 9, verse 2. And after 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John and led them up a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them. And his clothes became radiant, intensely white, as no one on earth could bleach them. And there appeared to them Elijah with Moses, and they were talking with Jesus. And Peter said to Jesus, Rabbi, it is good that we are here. Let us make 3 tents, one for you, and one for Moses, and one for Elijah. For he did not know what to say, for they were terrified. And a cloud overshadowed them, and a voice came out of the cloud, This is my beloved Son. Listen to him. And suddenly looking around, they no longer saw anyone with them, but Jesus only. And as they were coming down the mountain, he, that is Jesus, charged them to tell no one what they had seen until the Son of Man had risen from the dead. So far our text. So there's another paragraph to follow on our handout. Let's go ahead and take a look at that. Jesus took Peter, James, and John with him to witness the manifestation of his glory, or the revelation of his glory on the Mount of Transfiguration. This inner circle was granted the privilege of being close to Jesus at special times. And you could see some of the examples there just in Mark's gospel alone. These 3, along with Andrew, Peter's brother, were the first to be called by Jesus to be his disciples. Why Andrew was not included in the inner circle, we cannot say, but there is no evidence of any friction as a result of the Lord's granting this special position to the 3. So it's interesting. Jesus has 12 disciples, but there's only 3 who are allowed to see this. Wonder why that is. Question 271 has you kind of talk about that a little bit. So go ahead, pause the video here, and take some time to discuss question 271. And when we come back, I'll share some of my thoughts. All right, question 271. Why did Jesus want an inner circle of disciples who would enjoy an especially close relationship with him? Why would, and we could put this in the negative sense, why would Jesus exclude 9 of his disciples and play favorites with 3? There's a lot of people who have asked that kind of question. And the answer to that question is found in the fact that Jesus is both, not just true God. Yes, he is the Son of God, the second person of the Trinity, but he's also true man. And as true man, he has certain physical, emotional, sociological needs. And one of those needs that he has as true man is he has a need for friendship. He needs, as true man, Jesus desired close friendships. His humanity needed the support of close friends who would be there to support and guide and take care of him, just like we do. If you think about it, you probably have an inner circle of 3 or 5 or maybe as many as 6 different friends, people that you hold a little closer than others, people to whom you tell things that you don't tell other people. And it's good to have that. It's not that you're excluding the other 7 billion people in the world. It's acknowledging that we have this need for closeness, but not everybody desires the same level of closeness with us. Not everybody likes us as much as some other people. Not everybody puts up with us as much as some other people. And the same could be said for Jesus. There were some of his disciples who, maybe through no fault of their own, kind of held him at arm's length a little bit. And because he was the rabbi, because he was the Messiah, because he was in this position of authority, they may have kind of said, not going to get too close. But Peter, James, and John were welcomed into that inner circle. They were allowed to be Jesus' closest friends and friends upon whom he could rely, because he needed that. Being fully human, he needed that. he needed to have those people that he could wrestle with things with. We'd see those same three individuals a little bit later in the Garden of Gethsemane. As the time is coming for Jesus to be betrayed, he goes into the garden and he goes a little farther again with these three. And he invites them to pray with him. Not that the rest of the disciples didn't want to pray with him as well, but Jesus enjoyed a close relationship with these three. And that's okay. Just as it's okay for us to have 2 or 3 or 5 or 7, closer friends than others. This is one thing where, the idea of Facebook and social media kind of makes it really weird, because on Facebook we are invited to have friends, and I'm not boasting or bragging, because I do a lot of work with youth. Every time I go away to a camp, or if I speak somewhere, I get a dozen friend requests. There's a lot of people on Facebook that have reached out to me simply because they know I'm a Lutheran pastor, and for some reason they want to be friends with as many Lutheran pastors as they can. So I have over 1,000 friends, but not all 1,000 friends have the same level. I don't share the same level of things with them. I've got an inner circle of about 5 or 6 guys that I talk with and share things with. And that's okay. And that's okay. Because that's how God has wired us as human beings. You look at Genesis 1 and you go through all the 6 days of creation. God speaks and he says, God speaks, it happens, it is good. God speaks, it happens, it is good. That's repeated for 5 times. The 6th time, when God gets done, God speaks, it happens, it's very good, which is a way of saying it's the best of the good. Or even another way to put that is that it is perfect. And then in the next chapter, as he's looking around at this perfect creation, he finds something that is not good. He says it's not good for man to be alone. Therefore, I will make a helper for him. Okay, so it's okay for Jesus to have this sort of inner circle because he needs that to support the fullness of his humanity as he's living his life as the Messiah. All right. Moving on, let's read the next paragraph. After 6 days attaches this event to what went before. See Mark 27 to 38. If you want to pause the video and go back there and take a look at that, you can. If not, I'll kind of summarize. This is where Jesus takes his disciples and he takes them away on a retreat. They go out of Galilee, even out of what was historically Israel. They go away into a region of the Gentiles called Caesarea Philippi. And while they are there on retreat, that's when Jesus takes everybody's temperature and he says, okay, well, who do people say that I am? And they give all their answers and he says, who do you say that I am? And Peter gives that wonderful confession, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus goes on from there to explain what the Christ will have to do. He then explains the role of the Messiah, especially as Isaiah summed it up, I think, best. In his various characterizations of the suffering servant. And as Jesus is explaining this to his 12 disciples, who is it but his closest friend, Peter, or one of his closest friends, Peter, who pulls him aside and says, well, may it never be, Lord. To which Jesus says to Peter, one of his closest friends, get behind me, Satan. And then he goes on to explain, he pulls the crowds in and he begins to explain what it's going to mean for the Messiah. What the Messiah has come to do. And then the author of our Bible study asks us to pay a special attention to verse 38, which has Jesus saying, for whoever is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of him will the Son of Man also be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels. And so that's his way of saying, this is some pretty serious stuff. Okay? This is some pretty this serious stuff. So after all of this serious stuff has gone around, it's about 6 days after that. In 6 days, maybe there's more discussions, maybe things calm down, maybe things get a little bit less hectic, or maybe it raises more questions. And so to kind of answer some of those questions, Jesus takes Peter, James, and John, and away they go up this mountain for transfiguration. So let's go back to our Bible study. Jesus was transfigured before them. Metamorphothe means a change in form. It doesn't take much for you to see the word metamorphosis in that Greek word there. metamorphothe. So it means that Jesus was metamorphized. I don't know if that's an English word or not. I may have made it up. But he was changed in form, a transfiguration revealing something from within. Jesus was giving his inner circle of disciples a visual demonstration of his true glory as the Son of God. Okay? So Jesus is metamorphed. I think that is, I'm not sure if that's even a word either. I don't know how to make that a verb in English. But he was changed. He was changed. And again, this is not a manifestation. He doesn't become, a lot of times we talk about cocoons and butterflies, and a cocoon is goes through metamorphosis and becomes a butterfly. It's not like that. It's like there's no change in who Jesus is. He's just letting them see the more fullness of who he is. He's just pulling back the curtain on that secret part of him a little bit more. He's just letting a little bit more of his divinity hang out than he has before. It's been there the whole time. He's just showing it a little bit more. So, with that in mind, go ahead and pause the video and take a look at question 272 and 273. And notice on question 273, it asks you to take a look at Luke chapter 9, which is where Dr. Luke talks about this same transfiguration. I highly encourage you to head over there and see this little added tidbit that Luke adds as well. So, again, pause the video, take a look at question 273. Hope you had a good discussion. Let's pick up our study here with question 272. What significance do you see in the fact that Mark emphasizes that even Jesus' clothing became dazzling white? See Isaiah 64 and Revelation 7. I forgot to mention that you should look up those verses too. If you didn't take a look at those, go ahead and pause the video here and come back, because this is another wonderful little thread that runs through our scriptures that we want to kind of tug on a little bit. So what's the significant? What significance do you see in the fact that even Jesus' clothes became dazzling white? Well, first of all, it shows the utter holiness of the Son of God, even in flesh and blood, that the fullness of the divinity is joined with humanity in the person of Jesus Christ. That Jesus Christ is not half God, half man, but he is fully God, fully man, existing in a mysterious way together, having the attributes of both. There's some very precise language that I know we talked about a whole lot in seminary. I didn't memorize it, but if you ask me later, I can probably look it up and find it for you. But it's understanding that Jesus is not half and half, but he's whole and whole shoved into one whole. And I know that's sometimes difficult for us to understand, as many things with the nature of the Trinity are. And so this is one of those things where we just have to believe it, even if we cannot logically understand it. This is a place where our logic, unfortunately, lets us down. And so here we see the fullness of the divinity taking over even the humanity. Matthew says that his face shone like the sun. And Mark here says that even his clothes were dazzling bright. That is to say that the brightness was so great that it perhaps changed the appearance or the very nature of the clothing that he was wearing. And that is a wonderful theme that we see throughout the scriptures. Isaiah 64 talked about how our good works are like polluted garments before him. I looked at this at the beginning. I want to look at it again, though. All of our righteous deeds are like polluted garments. Our righteousness is not white as snow, and there's a deeper meaning to that idea of polluted garments that I'm not going to go into right now. And so, by ourselves, we are polluted garment. But Revelation 7, which I do remember quite well, talks about the saints coming out of the tribulation, the ones who have washed their robes in the blood of the Lamb and made them white. Look, I don't do a whole lot of laundry. I do help a little bit with the laundry, but I do know that if I take a white garment and put it in a sink full of blood, it's not going to come out whiter than it was before. And so this is again where this idea of clothing helps to symbolize our relationship with Jesus. The only way that works logically to take a white garment and put it in blood and have it come out whiter than before is when we're talking about the blood of the Lamb, and when the garments that we're wearing are our identity before God, how God sees us. Then yes, we do. Then when we come through the blood of the Lamb, God sees us better than we are. Absolutely, He absolutely sees us better than we truly are. Another one that's not mentioned here, it's one of my favorites though, is from Galatians chapter 3, verse 27. All of us who have been baptized into Christ have put on Christ, is how it's translated in the ESV. In the NIV, when I first memorized it though, it said quite correctly, all of us who have been baptized into Christ have put on Christ. Like a garment. We have, it's my favorite analogy for this is thinking of different athletes suiting up for sports. Let's take the obvious example from the Super Bowl that was just a few months ago, or a few weeks ago, a few days ago. I don't know. It was a while ago. And Tom Brady. Tom Brady won his 7th Super Bowl, but his first with Tampa Bay. What changed for Tom Brady? Well, his uniform. Obviously, Tom Brady was just as good of a quarterback in Tampa Bay as he was up in New England. He had the same kind of success in Tampa Bay that he had up in New England. What changed? He put on a different uniform. See, and all of us who have been baptized into Christ, we have clothed ourselves with Christ. We have put on that athletic uniform. We have changed teams. And so, whereas you may have had defensive players, I don't know if Tampa Bay played against New England, in the previous season, but if they had, those defensive players were trying to rip Tom Brady's head off. But now that he has on the uniform of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, now they don't want to see anything bad happen to him at all. Defense doesn't necessarily protect the offense, but you understand that they're now on that team. And that's what happens to us in baptism, is that we are clothed with Christ. We put on the uniform for Jesus' team. We are now on Team Jesus, and he will do everything he can to protect us and help us to succeed. Everything he can, right up to the point and including, notwithstanding, giving his very life for ours and rising again from the dead so that we would have a sure and unwavering hope. Okay? So, again, the point of all of this is Jesus' clothes shone with the brightness of the sun. They were whiter than any bleach could get them, Mark says. And so clothes often symbolize our relationship with God. And we see this time and time again. All right, 273, that question. Moses and Elijah came to interact with Jesus as part of this dramatic display of divine glory. Why was it that these two appeared with him? So why did Moses and Elijah show up? What do they mean? Well, the people of Jesus' time, they didn't call their scriptures the Old Testament because there was no New Testament yet. You can't have an Old Testament if you don't have a New Testament. They referred to their holy writings as the Tanakh, and Tanakh was the first 3 letters of how they divided it. T stood for Torah, which is the law. N stood for, I always get this one wrong, so I'm not going to say it, but N stands for the Hebrew word for the prophets, and K stood for the Ketuvim, which were the writings, which is how they would characterize the Psalms, the Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Songs, all those sorts of things. So they would divide their books into those 3. You would have the Torah, which was the law and the history, kind of that first part of our Old Testament. Then they would have the writings, the Ketuvim, which was kind of that middle, which is the middle part of our Old Testament, and then they would have the prophets, which is that N word that I have somehow forgotten, and so TNK, but it's the law, the writing, the law, the prophets, and the writings. That's how they would characterize their scriptures. So if we were to take all of those law writings and all those historical writings and reduce them down to their one greatest figure, their one greatest person, that person would be Moses. After all, Moses was the one who was up on Mount Sinai, who received God's law from God at the beginning. Likewise, Moses was the one who retaught and preserved the law with the second teaching of the law, which is the book of Deuteronomy. And so Moses represents all of those writings reduced to one person. All of those things that are in the law that refer to and point to the coming of the Messiah, that is represented in Moses. And then likewise you have the prophets. All of these wonderful men of faith, some of whom have books of their own name, whose writings and prophecies and teachings we have recorded. You know, there's the majors, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel. Then there's also the minors, Obadiah, Jonah, Amos, Habakkuk, Micah. I'm not going to name them all, but you understand what I'm talking about. So we would take all of those prophetic people, and we would reduce them down to one. We would reduce them down to one who doesn't even have his own book, but we would reduce them down to Elijah. Elijah is far and away considered the best and most the best prophet. Best is not the right word. I can't find a better one, so we're going to stick with it. He's by far the best prophet of the Old Testament. Most of his writings you'll find encapsulated in, I think it's 1st and 2nd Kings. But there's one thing that happened in Elijah's life that sets him apart. And that is that Elijah was taken into heaven without dying. That there's that wonderful story about how, and in fact, I believe that's our Old Testament lesson for today, is the story of how Elijah is taken up in a fiery chariot without having died. One of only 2 people in the scriptures who are said to have gone to be with the Lord without having to go through the trials of death. Only 2 people in the scriptures, and one of them isn't even Jesus. One of them isn't even the true Son of God. And so, of course, when you think of when people at Jesus' time, when Peter, James, and John think of, well, who would best represent the prophets? It'd be Elijah. And so here in the Transfiguration, you have the law and the prophet talking with Jesus and saying, this is the one we were talking about. That all of the scriptures are fulfilled in him, in this one. That's why the two of those appeared and began to talk with Jesus. That's the second part of this question. What did they talk about? This is why I wanted to make sure you took a look at Luke chapter 9, verses 30 and 31, because here it tells us exactly what they talked about. And it's amazing. Behold, the 2 men were talking with him, Moses and Elijah, who appeared in glory and spoke of his departure, which he would accomplish in Jerusalem, or at Jerusalem. They were talking about his departure, his ascension, which would happen 40 days after his resurrection, which would happen 3 days after his crucifixion and death. They're talking about the mission of Jesus. But even as they talk about his departure, they're also talking about the next steps. Because even though Jesus is ascended into heaven, his ministry still continues. His mission still goes on. He ascends into heaven on the 40th day after Easter. On the 50th day after Easter, on the day of Pentecost, the Holy Spirit is poured out upon the disciples in an amazing way so that they can continue the mission, so they can keep on doing what Jesus began to do. You see, and those are all the kinds of things that they are talking about. All right, let's carry on. All of the evangelists tell of Peter's reaction and suggestion that he build 3 shelters for Jesus, Moses and Elijah and Mark's. And Mark's gospel is generally understood to be Peter's own eyewitness account. Peter later made the incident part of his testimony, and you can look at that in 2 Peter. Okay, note that sentence. This is believed to be Peter's own eyewitness account. Even though it bears the name of Mark, we believe that Mark was the name of the scribe who interviewed Peter and wrote down what Peter told him to write down. So with that in mind, pause the video, take a look at question 274. All right, everyone, welcome back. What about question 274? What's going on in Peter's mind to suggest his building the shelters? This is what's going on in his mind is simply a sense of awe, a sense of wonder, a sense of amazement. Could you imagine if you were to walk outside your door one day and there was not just Jesus, I shouldn't say not just Jesus, but even what if you walked out the door one day and there is Luke, the writer of the gospel, or there's the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther, the one who nailed the 95 Theses to the door and did all the rest. Imagine that you were to walk out the door and see one of your heroes of the faith. Imagine you were to walk out the door and see one of your heroes of popular culture. What if it was your favorite author, your favorite singer, your favorite movie director, your favorite actor? Wouldn't you want to spend as much time there as possible? Wouldn't you want to spend as much time with that person as you could, asking them questions or just sitting at their feet and listening to what they had to say? And so it's this kind of awe and wonder and amazement that's happening in Peter, or to Peter, inside of him, and he doesn't want it to pass. Now, this is something that I hadn't considered until just now, and that's this kind of second part of this question. What does it show about Peter that he was ready to admit that he was fearful and didn't know what to say, but spoke up anyway? So the first part of that question is that Peter even admits that he was fearful. He tells Mark in Mark chapter 9, verse 6. He says, let's build 3 shelters. One for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah. Then in verse 6, for he did not know what to say, for they were terrified. How does Mark know they were terrified? Because Peter told him they were terrified. And so when Peter looks back at this episode as he's telling it to Mark, he looks back and he sees how silly that sounds. He sees how he acted like a teenage girl fawning over the Beatles in the mid-'60s or something like that. He sees and he's able to bring up the fact that he was just being silly because he was so awestruck. He was so filled with awe and even fearful. He was terrified. And so it shows that Peter is able to make fun of himself. That he knows his own faults and he can make light of them. I've got to find it and put it up here in my office, but years ago at a church that I served, someone made a wonderful cross stitch for me, and it says, "Blessed are those who can laugh at themselves, for they shall never cease to be amused." And it's so true, isn't it? Here you find Peter sort of poking a little bit of fun at himself, talking to Mark and saying, yeah, this is what I said. He doesn't edit himself. He says, yeah, that's what I said. I didn't know what to say. I was pretty scared, because not only is Jesus glowing brighter than the sun, but here's also Moses and Elijah talking to him. I didn't know what I was supposed to say. And so, I was pretty afraid. And so this is what I said. I love the fact that Peter doesn't go back and edit himself. Peter would have a chance to say, and I said, behold, what a wonderful day this is, and forsooth, let us celebrate this day and consecrate a fast. He doesn't do that. He tells the truth about what he's done. And personally, I love him all the more for it. That he's willing to have that openness about his mistakes and say, I didn't quite handle that right. And so it shows that Peter's a pretty balanced dude. Even though he can, he is given to some outbursts and some fits of rage, cutting off ears of servants of the high priest, or telling Jesus how the Messiah is supposed to act, and things like that. He's not perfect, but he's got a good heart for confession and admitting when he's made a mistake. Moving on, because if you can't tell, the Transfiguration is one of my favorite events in the Scripture, and so I'm getting away from myself here. The voice of heaven spoke from a cloud. Clouds often were the setting of God's revelation of himself to his people. If you look in Exodus, those two parts of Exodus, there you will see Moses going up into the cloud, and then also in Acts chapter 1, verse 9, Jesus ascending into the cloud as well. That's like actual physical clouds. We're not talking about those data storage places that are the cloud. Anyway, go ahead and pause the video and discuss the next 3 questions. And when we come back, I'll give you some thoughts, and I'll try to keep them somewhat succinct. Okay, so let's take a look at those 3 questions then. What was the Father's main concern for the 3 disciples relative to their recognizing Jesus as his son? So when, as if Jesus' brightness weren't enough, as if his talking with Moses and Elijah weren't enough, you have this voice that comes from heaven and says, "This is my son, my beloved son, the son whom I love." And then what's the instruction that God gives to those disciples after he identifies his son? Listen to him. Listen to him. That's the Father's main concern. The Father's main concern is that these 3 will listen to what Jesus has to say. Because Jesus' instruction by word and deed would form the basis of their ministry to the world. This is something that we would do a very good job to remember and reinforce in our own lives. It's very important for us to spend time in all of God's Word, absolutely, but you should spend the majority of your time in the Gospels, because it's there that we hear Jesus' words directly, and it's there that we see Jesus' actions directly, and it's there that we understand what we are to do as Christians. I think I'm not alone in remembering a couple decades ago when there were those little gel bracelets that they would wear on your wrist, and they would have the letters WWJD. What would Jesus do? Well, you can't answer that question if you're not in the Gospels. You can't answer that question if you're not listening to Jesus. Don't tell me what Jesus would do unless you're spending time listening to Jesus. That's what the Father tells these 3 to do. Listen to him. They wouldn't have the benefit of being able to read the scriptures back to one another. And so they had to listen and pay attention to what Jesus had to say. What they did have the benefit of is being with Jesus quite a bit. And so repetition is the mother of memorization. When I've had to memorize things, I just would repeat them over and over and over again until I at least had a handle on them, so I could regurgitate them for the test and then forget them. But Peter, James, John, they are going to be with Jesus. They're going to hear him say the same thing many, many times, and that's going to help. And so they need to listen and pay attention so that they have an idea of what he means. Okay. Question 276. Why did Jesus order the 3 not to tell about this experience until after he had risen from the dead? Okay. This is in order to make sure that people have the right perception of who the Messiah is and what the Messiah has come to do. The very popular opinion was that he was to be a political prophet, one who would lead political rebellion against the Romans and usher in a new political state. That's not it. Jesus' role as Messiah is best found, in my opinion, in Isaiah's prophecies of the suffering servant, of which Isaiah has, I believe, 4 throughout his book. There's 4 different times where he details this suffering servant of the Lord and how he goes through all of this trial and turmoil in place of other people. Isaiah 53 is one of the most poignant places where you'll find it. I think it doesn't quite start at verse 1. Maybe it does. Maybe I always forget. But it's there that we get a lot of the verses and ideas that we talk about in Lent. How we considered him stricken by God, smitten and afflicted. That upon him was placed the iniquities of us all, and by his wounds we are healed. And so Isaiah paints this picture of a servant who suffers in place of the people to bring them freedom. And that's who the Messiah was to be. That's what he explained to his disciples when Peter said rightly that you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And then he went on to explain what that meant, that it was going to be like Isaiah predicted, that it was going to be him suffering. That's why Peter corrects him and rebukes him and says, no, it's not going to be that way. That's not the way I'm reading the scriptures. I giggle because, you want to say, Peter, who the heck are you to correct Jesus? But let's be honest, we would do it too. And so Jesus wants to preserve this idea that the Messiah has come to be the servant who suffers the sins of the world and rises again from the dead to give victory over enemies that are much greater than Rome or Babylon or Assyria or anything that the people have ever known. But he gives victory over sin and death and the devil. Those three foes that can kill eternally, and not just in time, but they can kill for eternity. And finally, question 277. What does this manifestation of Jesus' glory say to us for our life today? Listen to him. Our vision for life must focus on Jesus. The vision for our life must focus on Jesus. I've got leadership books on my shelf here in my office, in my personal library, all about having a vision and a strategy and an idea of what you want the future to look like. And maybe you've gone through something like that in your own personal development or something like that as well. If that vision doesn't include Jesus, rethink it. If that vision doesn't include how you're going to do what you do to further the kingdom of Jesus in some way, shape, or form, rethink it. I'm not saying that you got to quit your job and become a nun or a monk or something like that. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that what you do each and every day has a way to serve Jesus in the furthering of his kingdom. In fact, there are a number of different ways that you can do that. And you can do that, and you could still earn a living, and you could still have a somewhat comfortable lifestyle. Okay, but make sure that our vision for life always must focus on Jesus, and because it focuses on Jesus, we must listen to him so that we can continue his mission in our time. The Father tells Peter, James, and John to listen to Jesus because he knows Peter, James, and John are going to go on and form this thing that is called the church. Today, he tells us to listen to Jesus because he knows that we must continue to carry on this ministry that is called the church. And we can only do that as we walk closely with Jesus. Well, that is more than enough for today. This is going to be a little bit of a longer video. I love the Transfiguration. It's just one of my favorite episodes in the life of Jesus. There's just the way Matthew, Mark, and Luke all tell it, there's so many little parts to it, so many little details that when you pick them up, it just can be really, really cool. So thanks for suffering through this with me, maybe. I don't know. Thanks for letting me vent my excitement. Let's put it that way. All right. Let's close our time with prayer. Dismiss us with thy blessing, Lord. Help us to feed upon thy word. All that has been amiss, forgive, and let thy truth within us live. Amen. Peace be with you.